So if people want to chit-chat about something while we're waiting for others to come back?
Well, you were going over different types of Lojong. We actually practiced them. Yeah, but I didn't catch every detail. In other words, were there 3 or 4 or...
Right.
You know.
So sometimes with Lojong, the practices are the way to do the sitting is divided into various points. And I think I mentioned yesterday, in older times, one would often study Lojong over a period or receive Lojong transmission over a period of some months or a year or something like that. Maybe once a week or once every 2 weeks, get a teaching and then do that practice till the next session. In olden days, it was more like that. And so when they did the preliminaries, you'd start with the Guru Yoga practice usually. And you just do that for twice a day or 4 times a day, however many times, for that period. And the next time you come and do each of the 5 preliminaries, the 5 main preliminaries listed in most of the manuals, but I'm just mention the 3 main ones today. The developing the mind of joy at being human, and death and dying, or immortality of mortality, and karma, cause and effect, Gutre, which is really usually taught as the Four Noble Truths. Part of what's the Four Noble Truths, or why we get all tied up in knots, and how we're often all feeling all tied up in knots, and how we come to be tied up in knots, and then how we untie the knots, the path to that untying of the knots, that sort of thing. So if those 3 are the sort of 3 main preliminaries in the tradition. Sometimes also refuge is thrown in there. In other words, Buddha Dharma Sangha, meaning of Buddha Dharma Sangha, the practice of 6 times, 3 times during daylight and 3 times during darkness, doing the refuge practice. But I usually don't bother mentioning that because most people it's not necessary, I think. It's part of Guru Yoga, so it's not really necessary as a separate one. So those 3, I think, are important. And then if one does those as points, the Guru Yoga is simply doing the sadhana. When it goes Om Sabhavachara into emptiness, you go into emptiness. And the visualization and whatnot, the dissolving of the lineage blessings into oneself, that kind of thing. So that's all sort of self-explanatory. Although, when they give commentaries, you can take them as deep as you like, because they say Guru Yoga is the first practice on the way to enlightenment, and it's only fully realized when you achieve enlightenment. So in that way, it's the last practice before enlightenment. So that's said about it.
On those first 3 were, like, for example, the truth of karma or death, dying. Do we just use our own personal experience to think about that, or what do we do?
Well, if you read one of the Lojong books, that helps.
Oh.
But usually Lojong, the main method is firstly contemplating certainty of death. So these are called contemplative meditations, as Zhenggong Kongtrul puts it in his commentary. They're moving meditations, so you move the mind through certain facts of life, if you will. But we call those facts of life dharma. Certainty of death, Notice how you don't know many people over 150.
Right. That's true.
Uncertainty of the time of death is the second. So we know people who have died in the womb, and people died coming out of the womb, and people died in infancy and in childhood and in teen years and in their 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s, and even the great Billy Graham, who went to college in Wheaton, Illinois.
It's right.
Didn't make it to 100, try as he may. So the uncertainty of time. And thirdly, how when we go, we don't take much with us. Certainly we don't take any possessions, and secondly, we don't take any political powers we have, and social powers, and money powers, etc. No friends or relatives. When you die, your best friend may still be sitting here saying bye-bye.
Yeah.
Or when he dies, you may go bye-bye. You go on by yourself. Sometimes those three are stretched out to 9, with each of the 3 points being given a point. Like, in other words, it's called the 3 and 9 causes. And I think in most spiritual traditions, remembering one's mortality is considered one of the main practices in establishing a spiritual foundation. And with the third, when one goes on, yes, everything left, and even one's body, which was one's best friend from the time of one's conception, is left behind. And karma and cause and effect can be contemplated in various ways. Lojong suggests a few. Lama's teaching will often give their private or personal kind of advice. When Geshe Rabden taught it to us in the early 70s, he suggested the idea of gardening and the growth of a tree. But just what Christ says, you reap what you sow, which is stolen from the Indo-Buddhist tradition of cause and effect, or karmic law. If you feed a tree well, it grows big and strong, and if you feed it badly, it shrivels and possibly even dies, and so on. So those kind of things. And then when it goes on to the two bodhicittas, the ultimate and the illusory or deceptive, ultimate and conventional, then each commentary in Tibetan, I think there's a number of different lamas will teach that in different ways, but the order is very clear. And all schools of Tibetan Buddhism do that. First, the dreamlike nature. So Tibetans often, Tibetans are sort of torn between the Indian schools known as Chittamatra, which is mind only, and Madhyamaka. So it really started as Madhyamaka with Nagarjuna,
Right.
and then sort of went a Sangha interpreting Nagarjuna in a particular way, took it towards Chittamatra. So if you take it in the Chittamatra way, and some Lojong teachings really like the Chittamatra school. And the Chittamatra school of India became one of the most popular schools for Zen Buddhism around the world. A lot of Zenists are Chittamatrans. And many people think of Mahamudra and Dzogchen as being closer to Chittamatra way of thinking than to Madhyamaka way of thinking. So if you say all things are like a dream, in the Chittamatra sense, everything, our mind really projects what we experience. You know, so when you're in a dream, whatever you dream of is kind of your own projection. So noticing how in a dream everything happens on the basis of your mind, both the sense of yourself and your sense of someone else and something else happens, but it's really, both of them are happening on the basis of your mind, isn't it? They're both really you in a particular kind of sense. So some Lojong teachers emphasize that for that first line, noticing how everything you experience is just something on your mind. Like, for instance, Donald Trump.
It's in everybody's mind.
He's a very good example for how things are just on your mind. Because whatever we experience really is just something that arises in our mind. The only thing we know about it is what arises in our mind.
I would say that the whole concept of mind is an illusion. It's just a label for all kinds of things that go on. And then we say, oh, that's all mind. But I don't think it's really, mind is not necessarily any more existent than anything else. Mm-hmm. And I disagree that everything is an illusion, or everything is illusory, and that everything arises in your mind. I think it's totally true that one projects things onto circumstances if one isn't really clear and aware. But everything, I mean, to say that everything is in your mind, everything arises in your mind, everything is a projection of your mind.
It doesn't say everything that arises is in your mind.
Okay, what
means whatever you experience only is your experience by arising in your mind. So that's quite a different point. So the only thing you know about it is what you know about it. And the reason you know something about it is because it's in your mind. If it's not in your mind, you don't know anything about it. There could be a form of life, you know, on the tip of this little piece of wood, which is whole universe is happening there, like Men in Black's universe on the Pussycat's Little Jewel. But it's not in your mind, so you don't notice it. You don't know anything about it. Whatever you notice is something that arises in your mind. So the point of the mind-only teaching is that we personify everything and contextualize it to our own likes, dislikes, our own perceptual apparatus, and so on and so forth. That's the biggest point of it. So if you take Dzogchen teaching, as exemplified in the Bardo Tudal and other Dzogchen instructions, it's very often said that to notice how everything that you experience is a projection of your own mind. That's a very common statement in hundreds and hundreds of Dzogchen texts.
I have also read in those texts, or some of these texts, that the whole concept of mind is possibly also an illusion. But I think the point in saying that is just that everything could have a certain quicksand quality to it, and in certain ways. You're right. Mm-hmm. I agree that we only know what arises. There could be other universes right here that we don't know about. Mm-hmm. That's all true. But I think it's a mistake in Buddhism to act like mind is some kind of huge answer to understanding.
Well, obviously, to say that mind is an answer to understanding, that's kind of an ambiguous statement, but if you understand something, you only understand it in your mind, I think. What does that mean, understanding? That means some kind of processing. Anyway, so with Lojong, these two ways of taking it. One is from the mind-only side. This statement, everything is like a dream. In a dream, whatever you experience seems separate from you. But in reality, you're the only one there. There's no dog barking at you, or there's no monkey in the tree, and so on. It's a dream. It's your total life theater. So that's why it's called Chittamatthan, basically. And of course, in Dalai Lama school, they are not so fond of that way of thinking. They think it's very good for intellectuals, but it doesn't meet up with some of the other criteria of closer examination. So they prefer the sort of Nagarjuna not as interpreted by a Sangha, but as interpreted by later masters like Chandrakirti and Bhava Viveka and so on. But what does that mean? In that way of thinking, whatever you experience is like a dream because you're always contextualizing it. You're contextualizing it in many, many different ways based on your perceptual apparatus, the way a worm experiences something, or an anchovy experiences something, and an elephant experiences something. The way a person educated in one way experiences it, and a person educated in another way experiences it. By the way a loving person experiences something, and a irritated, and so on. In other words, in Nagarjuna's way, as explained by, as taken by Chandrakirti and so on, Bhava Viveka, is that all things are like a dream in that our take on them is completely personal. So earlier I mentioned when I was shopping in Home Depot and a fundamentalist Christian thought I stole her. Yes, the sun has shone on me too brightly. My aura has become so powerful that the cameras are unable. So I'm more, myself personally, I think I'm more like the Chandrakirti Bhava Viveka way of thinking it, of interpreting that line, that how everything we experience. So when we do that as a meditation, try to take someone you disliked as an object of contemplation and later came to like, or something you held a particular opinion about and later the way you thought about it completely changed. That the status we give to things comes from our own experience, comes from our own contextualization. So like the Christian fundamentalist who looked at me with angry eyes as a potential thief of a shopping cart, who had taken it with 3 or 4 of her things, dumped off the things I didn't want, and then started putting on my own things. And then later when she came back, she saw me as this saintly person who had been wrongly accused. And it's, many things are like that in our relationships. So here I think Dalai Lama school tends to take things more in that way. Notice how everything you experience is given its status based on your contextualization, but also noticing how we tend to bring duality into our experience of things. We tend to bring disconnectedness into our sense of things. That is to say, we think this is really how it appears, and it really looks different than everything else and separate from everything else, but it's not really connected to anything else. notice the totally interconnected, thus universally transformative nature of all things. How the whole flower, the whole universe exists in a flower. That the whole universe comes into the flower, and the flower looks separate from the universe and arises in the mind separate from the universe. But without the whole universe being there, there's no flower. The flower is just the whole universe manifest in a particular form. My sense of I am just the whole universe manifest in a particular way. And taking that way it's manifest as something separate from the universe is a basic error, in the same way that in a dream, dreaming an external dog is biting us, which is separate from me in the dream. So that side is very strongly emphasized. And to me that makes a lot of sense. So in one of my favorite Karmakagyupa characters was the very unpopular Sharmapa. He was unpopular because he selected a second Sharmapa and became very grumpy in his old age about that whole issue. But I like his basic teachings and writings. And one of the points he made is, if you don't get anything else from that Lojong line, it teaches you not to take specifics too seriously. So it is the first line in the emptiness teaching. It's not like the ultimate emptiness teaching or the final emptiness teaching. It's a first introduction to what is meant by emptiness. And if you don't get anything else out of it, is to learn not to take momentary impressions too seriously. That essentially thinking Obama's the greatest thing since sliced bread and therefore give him the Nobel Peace Prize right away. And then later, well, maybe yes, maybe no. Donald Trump's the worst thing since sliced bread. I hate sliced bread. I love to slice my own bread. It's the worst thing since sliced bread. And later, maybe yes, maybe no. And with everything we experience, we tend to, as it's said by the Buddha in many sutras, based on our personal likes and dislikes, exaggerate the good qualities of the things we like, and similarly exaggerate the bad qualities of things we have personal dislikes for. And they don't have much to do with reality. It's just like a tip of an iceberg of the reality of being. So I very much like that teaching by the recent Sharmapa. He probably elected the wrong Karmapa, but who knows? That's a kind of a personal issue. And with reincarnations, I mean, I always thought I was the reincarnation of someone great, but nobody's announced it yet. Other people get announced as the reincarnation of someone very great, and then they turn out to be like flunkies. They like flunk out on the greatness path. So if we don't learn anything else from that passage or from that statement, that Lojong statement, is to look at the things we experience and see why we like them so much and why we dislike them so much, and see the conditioning factors that go into the way we perceive them.
Thoughts had passed through my mind through various phenomenon and material of your speaking in relation to those phenomenon, but they had to do with something Shanta Davis said, that you know, as you were mentioning, the world is reflected itself in the flower. The flower is part of the universe, and the flower is Buddha. All these good things, the Buddha is the flower.
I don't remember Shanti Deva saying that. I
was using allegorical speech. I wasn't trying to be
I'm just teasing you.
referential.
Yeah.
But if if Shantideva would say that, these things that come together, they have no mind and purpose to come together, you drop something on your toes on the way out the door, and a frustrating day is getting all the more frustrating, but because it's going terrible, something else happens, 20 minutes down the line, and it turns out to be a good kind of terrible. So everything is always, the things that come together have no mind themselves to come together, but they come together, which had something to do with something I forgot.
Shantideva didn't say anything like that. Where did he say that?
I see it in...
I think you're making it up.
Well,
you're bluffing.
And
when I mention that you're bluffing, you blinked. Anyway, yeah, I get what you're talking about. That essentially
not having a permanent self.
What?
He was referring.
Well, you were talking about a flower here, right?
I was.
No, you quoted
I had a lot
the
on my
flower.
mind. I was falling asleep. I thought I'd try to participate here.
Okay.
So anybody else want to try this?
That's a good wrap up. I like that. Thank you for that. Was good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm teasing you. I'm teasing you.
You're doing a good job.
Yeah, no permanent self. Yeah, the problem is when we have this sense of self, not only sense of ourself, but sense of a table. It has this kind of sense of something which is static. And as the expression Runging O Zimba holds a nature or exists in the manner of its appearance. And of course, it's a big mistake because nothing is permanent. Well, we shouldn't say nothing is permanent, but no conditioned phenomena or no composite phenomena is permanent. And your point there is completely true. And flowers, for that reason, don't exist in the solid way they appear, just like rainbows don't exist in the solid way that they appear. So back to these two schools. So with the second line, how mind itself is unfindable. And I guess for us in the West, this word mind is a little different than the way if you walk up to 20 or 30 people and ask them what's meant by mind, they'll immediately divide body and mind. And so body is this and mind is that. Those are kind of the two big things, right? Healthy in body and mind. But I don't think it's really that way in the Buddhist world. Or in most other cultures. That of course, physical and spiritual there being mind. Physical and spiritual, we can talk about those two things, and in both Eastern and Western tradition, the words have something of the same meaning. But often I think in the West, if we say spiritual, it has a sense of religion, doesn't it? He's a spiritual person means he's something of a religious person, or a person of religious interests or religious orientation, something like that. I guess in the mind here and body, this came up once in a discussion with the Dalai Lama, and he was saying body appears to, in Buddhism, means everything to do with our sense of ourself in the world. In other words, my body, when I think my body, I should think the continents and the other people and so on and so forth. And when I think my mind, I'm really thinking, or my spirit, I'm really thinking about my personal experience of myself. In other words, what Gunther calls being with yourself, and the other is being with others and being with the world. So mind, I think, in the Buddhist context is the operating system on which all the various programs work. And without that operating system, none of the programs work. But when we experience our mind we experience personally as kind of the witness of our experience, isn't it? In other words, there's the dog over there barking, and the me who is the witness of the dog over there barking. In other words, body there really refers to world, and mind refers to a kind of witness of events. And we have this sense that the witness of the events, in other words, mind, is a findable thing. So that second contemplation, back to your point of how do you explore the unfindability of mind. In the Buddhist world, often they do it by noticing the way we separate all things into what's referred to as the three circles: the witness, the thing witnessed, and the act of witnessing. And we have a sense there really is a witness, there really is a witnessed, and there really is a sense of witnessing. And the impression we get is that these things are really solidly, independently operating faculties. But in reality, there is no lover without a beloved, and there is no lover and beloved without an act of loving. There is no thief nor a crime of theft without someone playing those parts. All those three things arise and fall on the nature, on the basis of the three circles. So some of the meditation manuals on that second line, notice the unfindability of, notice the meaning of that line being, observe the unfindability of mind itself. The inability, like things arise on the mind, but is the thing that arises in your, I look at a peach and I have a sense of a peach. Is my mind the thing observing the peach, or is the peach something that arises within the waters of my mind? There is no mind of a peach without the peach there. My mind arises with a kind of peachiness. So that second line is a little bit like that. How can we have this experience, observing? Now, I don't think this is trying to give an answer. This isn't a philosophical thing. It's not saying it's like this or like that. It's saying, notice how, when you experience something, you become that something. And is it that your mind becomes the flower when you see the flower? Or you just see a flower and it's like a moon reflected in water? So it's really a kind of an observation in meditation, in a quiet sense of looking at your own mind and your own experience and trying to get the sense of the relationship between subject, object, and interaction between the sense of I'm here, the object's there, and here am I observing that object. I think that's a very key point to success in that second instruction. And the third line, the remedy itself dissolves on its own ground. Even the word emptiness can be misleading. The ultimate nature of things can be misleading, the ultimate nature of mind, these kind of expressions, the semgineluk. Emptiness itself is empty of being. It's just something within, it's just referring to a way of experiencing things. And we think, oh yeah, the emptiness, yeah, sure, great, that's wonderful. I love emptiness. It's so interesting, emptiness. But it's really not something there that's findable in the way we think of it. And again, that's not a philosophical statement. And it's really just an instruction on how to observe in our own mind the manner in which we experience things. Lojong Gongtrol, the Great, as he's often called, often in the Tibetan world they throw that word Champo, the Great, at the end. If you write more than 1,000 books, I've only written 30. But some of them have 10 or 15 different books in them, and some have 20 or 30 different books in them. So I'm the Gray, G-R-E-A. I still have or maybe just G-R-E. Still got a couple of letters to go. So these are contemplative observances. In Tibetan, literally the word chegam literally means kind of probing. Probing, exploratory, something like that. In other words, they're questioning or challenging the way we think about the things we experience, the way we think about our own mind, and the way we think about this whole idea of infinity or emptiness. So it's kind of probing or challenging those. So Jamgon Gongtrol Chambo says those are probing meditations, and when we achieve some maturity in them, we come to the fourth instruction. And the fourth instruction is put the essence of practice on the kunshi. Put the essence practice on the, often translated as foundations of all. In Sanskrit, the alaya or the alaya vijnana. So that foundations of all. And so Jamgon Gongtrol says after you develop some maturity in these three probings, after that you simply rest the mind in its own deeper nature. The meaning is without any probing, without any movement of the mind, any questioning, any kind of pressing the envelope or pushing the issue. Simply sit in alaya. And the alaya there, meaning the foundation consciousness on which all things rise and fall. So very similar to the idea of the mother clear light emptiness in Tantra, very, very similar idea. And so one basically settles the mind in its own inner radiance or inner being. So this very often this is an approach to, you could say, fourth stage meditation, fourth stage emptiness meditation, fourth stage ultimate bodhicitta. That's very much appreciated by many different trends in Tibetan Buddhist meditation. The idea of this aleya is that what goes from moment to moment and never changes. It's the unchanging foundation of all experience. So, later some Nagar, like Chandrakarti, Bhava Viveka, those guys didn't like the idea so much, didn't like the way it's described, but it became very popular and was certainly, especially with Shanta Rakshita and some of those early masters. A lot of people like to point out Milarepa didn't like it so much, didn't use that kind of language so much. But it's important to understand language is like a finger pointing at the moon. It's never the moon. So when meditative instructions are given, they're given as a finger pointing at the moon, and the actual way of the meditation should turn from it starts with the finger, looking at the finger. But if you look at the finger correctly, eventually the finger points, takes you to the moon. But in the beginning, where's the moon? Where's the moon? And so in terms of how to rest in the aleya, foundations of all. So some people take aleya to be this sort of storehouse consciousness, and others take it to be like Magi Usel, the mother clear light of mind. And there's not much difference, I think, in terms of the experience. So when one does that meditation, then there are the 6 famous Mahamudra pointers, as they're called, which is to try to leave your mind as fresh and unformed as a newborn child or a young child less than 3 months old. In other words, to rest in non-conceptuality, to rest in, sometimes in Mahamudra literature they say to rest in the original state or rest in the original nature. And some texts refer to it as original mind, rest in original mind, which really means a kind of an uncontrived mind. And to rest the mind with a sort of sense of joy and radiance, to maintain a quality of joy and radiance as you rest in original mind. Otherwise, often we get our pleasure from adrenaline rushes, playing video games, watching TV, what do you call paragliding, parachuting, bobsled riding down dangerous hills and skiing. So how to stay awake without all of that stimuli, without the adrenaline rush? Resting in a sort of a joyful, awake state. Selshing Rigpa. And thirdly, noticing how all the thoughts arise in our mind, like waves arise in the ocean, and waves seem to be different from the ocean, but actually they're not different from the ocean. They're just really ocean arising as waves. When we sit in original mind, or we sit in aleya, all these things that come and go are really just waves of our mind, fluctuations of presence. As Stephanie quite correctly pointed out earlier, amidst many misstatements, was that the word mind in English is a little bit nebulous, isn't it? Abstract. It's really not a very clear statement. We talk about consciousness, subconscious, the super unconscious. We come up with all kinds of terms in the last 100 years for different facets of mind. But the word mind in most people's understanding remains a little bit unclear. So the meaning is, as you sit in original presence, if you want to call it something like that, or just sort of simplicity is another word often used. Tritsel in Tibetan. Sit without fabrications, self-fabrications. Whatever arises, if you hear a sound, it's really a wave in your own mind. If you have a thought, it's a wave in your own mind. You feel sleepy, it's kind of a sleepy wave. And you feel agitated or excited, it's an agitated wave. So I think that point in this fourth level of ultimate bodhicitta takes some experimentation, I would say. That when you sit in meditation, you find yourself getting sleepy, how not to fall asleep, but to sit in your sleepiness or lethargy. You'll have waves of kind of very deep exhaustion come over you. Just because sitting without moving can become boring, because we're so used to boredom being filled with stimuli. In other words, we're bored with ourselves, so we need outside stimuli not to be bored. We're just sitting with ourselves, we easily become bored. Becoming bored, we become sleepy. Becoming sleepy, we become lethargic. So I guess the challenge is how to stay awake in your sleepiness. How to stay vividly present in your lethargy at those moments. And the instruction is to see these things as ocean and waves. Basically just an up in the wave or a down in the wave, or an up in the wave or a down in the wave. Sometimes when you do the practice, I think your teacher will give you some sort of hints for kind of questions to ask. A little bit like koans in the Zen tradition. These can come up. And so when you're feeling that very lethargy, that kind of question, you'll just apply that kind of, you'll generate that question in your mind. Who is it that's lethargic? Or what is it that's lethargic? Who is it that's sleepy? What is it that's sleepy? That could be one. And of course, that fourth line is connected a little bit to the development of samadhi, or shamatha in Sanskrit. The power to actually be vividly present without stimuli. So samadhi is a little bit like how to be like a completely alert boxer in the middle of a little bit of a boring round, knowing that if you become a little bit sleepy, your opponent can just go lights out with a single blow. Sometimes these things are given in measurements. Samadhi, the ability to hold the mind in one place without any movement, any sleepiness, or any distractions for so many hours. In Tibet, in olden days, they didn't talk about hours. They spoke about, if you divide the day into 6 parts and the night into 6 parts, in other 2-hour segments. How many 2-hour segments? Like that. But it's talking a little bit about that meditative muscle or concentration muscle, able to stay in the state of original mind, but at the same time, for it not to be a forced exercise. So let's do that for about 5 minutes or so, or 10 minutes. So to place the mind on the foundations of all. So if we ask ourselves, everything that I've experienced in this whole lifetime, what is that ocean? Where is that ocean upon which those waves of experience rose and fell? As a little kid walking around, what was it on which all experience rose and fell? As your primary school and secondary school and high school and college, and then when you joined the army and you were fighting evil enemies in foreign countries and carrying them home and cooking them up in the cooking pot at night because you hadn't brought enough beans with you. All the things that happened in your life. What is that fundament upon which all experience rose and fell? That's what's meant by the kunshi, the alaya. So let's take a 10-minute break. People can stretch their legs. So the section on the ultimate bodhicitta begins with the statement, when maturity is achieved, teach the secret. In other words, emptiness or the ultimate bodhicitta, it's good if the one learning or practicing has some foundation or some basis. And it's called the secret because emptiness, as it's said, only in a very deep state of samadhi does one experience the ultimate nature of being, the deeper nature of being. So all things have emptiness as their foundation, but it's like an invisible foundation. If we put that in a Christian way of talking, we'd say God is the foundation of all existence, but we don't see much of him. He's kind of illusory. So emptiness side is something which is always there. It's the ultimate or deeper nature of all things. But usually we look at the thing side and we don't notice that secret aspect of their presence, which is their interconnectedness with all things and the way nothing is separate from anything else. When we use that term non-duality in Buddhism, it's referring to how nothing is separate from anything else. It doesn't mean conventional noticing differences between this and that. Hot pancakes and cold pancakes. Properly cooked Irish stew and Irish stew that was messed up by throwing something in it. And you could make an Irish stew out of boiled clay and call it Irish stew if you had no other ingredients. Anyway, back to the point at hand. The secret. When maturity is achieved, teach the secret. So sometimes before teaching these 4 lines of emptiness meditation, the relative bodhicitta or illusory bodhicitta is taught, love, compassion, those kind of meditations. But for beings of highest caliber, the emptiness should be taught first. So when we talk about experience of emptiness, in Buddhist world, that's in a very particular kind of way. So we can hear about emptiness, and it's like a finger pointing at the moon, and doesn't give the experience of moon. And as we finally figure out that the finger is pointing at something and then try to figure out and calculate what it's pointing out or experiment with turning our neck or whatever you want to call it, there's different ways of talking about that. And when they often in the Asanga and the Nagarjuna, these guys, they spoke about the 10 and the 5 and so forth, sort of degrees of maturity. So at the beginning, emptiness is completely secret to your average person. It said you only experience it at the moment of going to sleep, but at that time you're so sleepy that you didn't notice. You experience it at the moment of orgasm, but at the time it was in a totally kind of, and for men that's like 1/3 of a second or something like that, and for ladies it's like 3 seconds or 5 seconds. And it's not really connected to the emptiness, it's just kind of a flash. In terms of cultivating it as a possessed spiritual experience or a realization, a tokpa, then for all beings it's just kind of a natural secret that's there but we don't notice. And as we meditate on things are like a dream, the mind is unfindable, emptiness itself is not findable as an entity. And placing the mind in the foundation of all, we go through states of epiphanies, you could say, epiphanies. So the epiphany level becomes a big issue. And so I think that's what's referred to in Zen as a kind of a satori, when one has a kind of a revelation, a quantum leap forward, a great leap forward in one's understanding. And I think in the meditation world, just meditating itself, is just sitting quietly and observing your mind and following these kind of instructions, has its own benefit. You know, brings benefits to health and to level of stress-free living, and just generally the size of your smile increases a little bit, like Ed, for instance. Which Ed? He used to have a very small smile. Then he started meditating and it got bigger and bigger and bigger. So just meditating a couple of times a day, sitting quietly a couple of times a day, and doing something in a kind of a disciplined, quiet manner, itself has health benefits and spiritual benefits, I would say. But in terms of sort of radical transformation of understanding, that comes from kind of breakthrough quantum leaps, epiphanies. What Tibetans call tokpa, and in the Zen tradition they refer to Japan tradition as sort of satoris, sort of basically crucial experiences, very high peak experiences, something like that. And so in the Sanga's 22 steps to enlightenment, that's kind of an issue that comes up. Nagarjuna's 5 paths to enlightenment, that comes up. That in the beginning it's a total secret, and we mostly grow in love, compassion, happiness, a calmer, clearer mind, better samadhi or better shamatha, better mental stability or meditative power. And it kind of just goes along like that. And then one day, kaboom, we have a big breakthrough. And that's said to be in Nagarjuna's system, a transference from the first path to the second path. Yes, and Nagarjuna calls it tru, which means fire or heat, something like that. So until that, mostly the positive qualities of mind are increasing or becoming stronger, and sort of unhappiness and tension and stress and sort of mental flip-flopping and all that sort of stuff are all dissolving. There's no like radical breakthrough to the deeper level of understanding. And then one goes through that for a while, and we have a number of epiphanies, if you will, 4 of them or something like that, being spoken of by Nagarjuna. And then the Tonglam, when there's a complete experience of the emptiness factor in meditation. And at that time, Tong Lam in Tibetan. Tong is seeing, means like insight, but seeing, but it can mean like an epiphany, and Lam. There's Mao Tanaro To Na Nga Tong. Tong, Lam, but A in Tibetan is always soft, ah, like that. As in water, lam. And that stage, Tong Lam, one becomes a saint, like Ed or Stephanie. Maybe not Stephanie, huh?
I was saying just to listen to all.
And then the Nagarjuna talks about 10 levels of 10 levels of sainthood. The bhumi, dasa bhumi in Sanskrit, which means in meditation one goes completely into ultimate emptiness experience or ultimate reality experience. And when you come out, how much of it you bring into your conventional presence. As it's put, when you go in, you're completely there. When you come out, the curtain of duality has some kind of level of obscuration, something like that. And those 10, therefore, are not based on the depth of your understanding or your experience of emptiness, but your ability to integrate into ordinary life, to carry that into ordinary life. In other words, the curtain or the shadow of duality, duality here meaning all the clarity of the interconnectedness of all things isn't completely there. And the 10 steps to enlightenment from there are said to be, often it's called the path of meditation, but meditation there really just means integration. So in the beginning it's called completely secret because we only experience it if some radical kind of occurrence comes up in one's mind. People sometimes get it through near-death experience or something like that. Something will happen that completely throws you out of the ordinary and brings in this kind of sense of the non-duality of things, or the interconnectedness of all things, or the infinity nature that pervades all things, or no, the infinity nature that, I don't know what's the right way to put it, the emptiness of separateness of all things, I guess. The way Buddha said it is probably the easiest to stick to without giving a wrong, a mistaken kind of take on it. But Mahayana generally, we say the Hinayana path to enlightenment is mostly marked by the experience of non-self or emptiness of self, whereas Mahayana is more marked by the development of the conventional bodhicitta. The epiphanies of emptiness are indispensable to enlightenment because from those come the liberation. But the power of the relative bodhicitta is what makes the big difference in terms of the transformation through those various stages. One thing that I like to mention, some schools talk about instant enlightenment and sudden enlightenment. That's a sort of a conversation in Tibet with some schools and also in the Far East with some schools. And I think all enlightenment, I think, really is sudden in the sense that 1 minute you have it and the next minute, 1 minute you don't have it, the next moment you do. But it's not sudden in the sense that there's something that goes into getting there. In other words, you make some efforts and you meditate like Milarepa for 18 years or Tsongkhapa for, I don't know, 20 years, something like that. And so it all happens very suddenly at the end, like the completion of a painting is really in the end just one brush stroke, isn't it? But in another way, first you prepare the canvas and then you mix the paints and do all of that kind of thing. So I think the Indians found a kind of a happy or very meaningful an articulate way to discuss that kind of issue. So the Indo-Himalayan Buddhism. Of course it's sudden, but on the other hand, those steps are step by step up to the sudden moment. It's like falling off a cliff. You walk and walk and walk and walk and walk, and then suddenly you fall off a cliff. You suddenly fell off the cliff. But you walked and walked and walked and walked to get to that place where you fell off the cliff. So let's finish by just reading through this little Guru Yoga thing just for fun. And I like to read these English texts the way they chant in Tibetan. To the Buddhas of the three times tender as well as the Dharma and the Arya term for inspiration from now until enlightenment. By the merit of practicing the six parameters may quickly become a Buddha for the benefit of all. To the Buddhas of the three times tender well as the Dharma and the Arya Sangha term from now until enlightenment. By the merit of practicing the six parameters may quickly become a Buddha for the to the Buddhas of the three times and 10 directions as well as the Dharma and Arya Sangha term for inspiration from now until. By the merit of practicing the six parameters may quickly become a Buddha for the benefit of all. So Tibetan's doing kind of a monotonous tone like that. Always irritates me when we do it in like Buddhist centers where they go, to the Buddhas of the three times and the 10 directions, as well as to the Dharma and Arya. I sort of feel like I'm in an Episcopalian church chanting some strange magic incantation. May all mother sentient beings have happiness and its causes. May they be free of dukkha and its causes. May they rest in joy beyond dukkha. And may they abide in a community that is free from attachment and aversion to the near and far. May all mother beings have happiness and its causes. They may be free of dukkha and its causes. May they rest in joy beyond dukkha. May they abide in equanimity that is free from attachment and aversion to the near and far. May all mother sentient beings have happiness and its causes. May they be free of dukkha and its causes. May they rest in joy beyond dukkha. May they abide in equanimity that is free from attachment and aversion to the near and far. Near and far really just means those things you like, those who are nice to you, and far those you really don't like. Above the crown of my head I envision a jeweled throne. You have to chant in this kind of way. Can I hear you here? Let's hear you. And you have to follow my beautiful rhythmic pace. Above the crown of my head I envision a jeweled throne held by 8 great lines. It is fastened extensive, and upon it is a meditative cushion made of a colored lotus with the moon dip. Seated there is my Rukru in the form of Buddha Amitabha, his Buddha in color. His feet crossed in the Vajra and his hands folded in the lap in the mudra of meditation. He is the embodiment of all Guru's mandala meditation. Buddhism, Dharma, out of kindness the Guru manifests from the sphere of sublime great bliss. Oh, precious spiritual mother, I bow at the lotus beneath your feet. Oh, precious Master, embodiment of all Buddhas, I call to you, precious Master, source of all the wonderful spiritual teachings. I call to you, O precious Master, chief guide of all living beings in the 3 worlds. I call to you, O precious Master, my source of refuge and hope. I call to you, inspire me to transcend every distorted state of mind. Inspire me to give birth to every clear state of mind. Inspire me to generate realization of the 2 bodhicittas, and bless my mind stream so that 2 bodhicittas may grow to final fruition within me. And give me strength that I may take any difficult obstacles as friends come to help me develop the 2 bodhicittas. A stream of white light now radiates forth from the crown of my Guru's crown chakra. It comes to the crown of my head and flows down through my body, bestowing waves of blessings of the Guru's holy body, purifying all negative karmas collected in previous lives by means of the body. Stream of red light now shines forth from the Guru's crown, coming to and dissolving into my throat chakra. Bestows waves of blessings of the Guru's holy speech and purifies all negative karma collected in previous lives by means of speech. Next, a stream of blue light radiates forth from the Guru's heart chakra, coming to and dissolving into my heart. It bestows waves of blessings of the Guru's holy mind. It purifies all negative karmas collected in previous lives by means of the mind. Finally, streams of red, white, and blue radiate forth simultaneously from the Guru's crown, throat, and heart, coming to and dissolving into my crown, throat, and heart. That is, bestow every blessing and purify all negative karmic seeds together with their instinct collected in previous lives by means, inseparability of thus body, speech, and mind. So then within having done that, we basically then just do whatever point of the Lojong meditation is being done, and thinking that as we're doing it, we've absorbed the lineage of all the masters, past, present, from the time of Buddha until now, through all the great masters, and we now hold that within ourselves, and then we just go into that emptiness meditation or bodhicitta meditation, death and dying meditation. Gyawa dihi nyardo da shenra ziwan trubgyurne droa chikum malapate salago persho jansho semcho rinpoche ma kiepan I kiegerchi kiepan yampa mepayong kone kondus pelwar sho. I always recommend to people with this kind of little liturgy to just take the things you like from it, and words you don't like, just X them out or put in words you like. That making it a kind of a poem that you use. And if you don't like it, just don't do it. But in the Lojong tradition, in all schools of Tibetan Buddhism, that's commonly the way every meditation session begins, is with a guru yoga practice like that. I think doing that, when one thinks of one's spiritual teachers, it gives you kind of a warm and fuzzy feeling that helps in sort of the happiness and health of the meditation.